Hello, world, and welcome to the Innovation Coaching Podcast. My name is Klaus Hostel, and with me today, I have Perle Laouenan. See, I did it on purpose
Allowing.
badly. I even asked you before, but I did it on purpose because now you're smiling. Pearl, now having butchered your last name, tell me how I can help.
Well, don't worry, you are not alone in butchering my last name. I think it's been done by everyone before you. Um, Klaus, amazing that you can help, I'm sure. So I am here to talk to you today about my concept need workshops that I launched in October last year. A little touch of background about me. I'm a facilitator, experienced designer, moderator. And last year, I got really kind of conscious that the way that we share ideas and the way that we try to make impact in the world is quite one directional. So it is, sharing ideas through presentation. Maybe we get a little bit of Q&A, and that's where the ideas kind of stay. And potentially, we know with learning, we go away and we retain a tiny element of what has been shared in that room or in that space or in that online space. And as a facilitator, I'm trying to solve for that. So I facilitate online workshops and I co-facilitate and co-design with people who are trying to put big ideas or make changes or put new frameworks out in the world that are trying to make impact. I need help because I have started this thing in October. I started with a testing mentality. Just test, see what happens, see if people want to buy workshop places. Will they turn up? They did. I've tested different concepts on climate. I've worked with different co-facilitators. I've looked at doing workshops on inner work as well. And in February this year, I put a bit of money behind a new website and to try and take it to the kind of, I've gone from testing to let's formalize and actually be something like grow, right? I need help to know how to grow, but also, I'm balancing a lot. I am a single income family with a daughter who I co-parent. I have a lot of work outside of this concept. And I need help to understand, one, on the structure, but also on making it easy for myself so that I can get the audiences to these workshops, that it can kind of grow organically. So that's in a nutshell what I need help with, Klaus.
In a nutshell, excellent.
In a nutshell.
So let's start there. Let's start, first of all, super cool that you're doing this for both people, planet, and maybe even little profit. What is working already? What are a couple of successes you've had, and what are some things where you thought this is going to be great, but it really wasn't?
Oh, okay. So what is working already is that people love the workshops.
Mhm.
So once they come and they join, there's a bit of magic that happens when we co-create and we have that collective wisdom. And after some of my workshops, accountability groups have kind of sparked up. There have networks have been small networks have been created, and it goes further than me. And that for me is success, because this is about ripple impact, right? It has to go further than that workshop or the session I always do afterwards, which is a reflection session. So that's one. And then, yeah, and I always, when even workshops where I've had small groups, maybe 7 people, each of those participants has emailed me a week or a couple of days or a month later and said, this thing is still landing with me, or this is something I really valued from this workshop. So that for me shows that there's something here that can be that meets people where they are, and that's where I feel success. What things that haven't gone so well is actually just getting people to buy tickets. That's the hard bit. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of energy. It feels like pulling one person in, each time is just a lot of work. And that's also why I co-design and co-facilitate with others, because I work with my network and their network. So, depending on how strong their network is, makes a huge difference. So trying to also attract people who have slightly bigger networks and have audiences that want to buy from them, that trust them, that's a big part of my strategy too. So
excellent. Let's start with that. So the first thing is that there's magic when it actually happens, which is really good because it means you're doing something that works, and that is a huge advantage. Now the sad thing is, it's not enough, right? It's a little bit like being good at something. Let's say I'm a great chef and say everybody who comes to my home and when I make a meal for them, they all say, wow, that was really great food, Klaus, and we had a great time. But if I go out on the street and say, hey, stranger, want to come eat at my place? I'm a great chef. First of all, they're going to say, are we talking about food here or what's going on? And the second is they're going to say, yeah, how about no? So being good is it's a very good start. But as you found out, that's not where the problem is, because you're creating ambassadors, but they need to get in the door first. So a quick question, what is the smallest group you can handle where it becomes a meaningful workshop? Can you do it with one person or two? I mean, you said 7, but could it work with 2?
it's an interesting question because I have actually postponed workshops that haven't had more than 5 people, because I believe that these workshops, the power is in the group and the convening of people who are interested in the same things but just don't live around the corner from one another and won't find each other in a space in a bar or in a workshop in person. And that's where the magic happens. It's not it's a big part because of the facilitation and my co-facilitators, but really the magic is when people feel less alone in how they feel about topics, or less alone in trying to make impact and getting up every day and going, oh wow, I'm not the only one who feels this way. And that's where, so yeah, I feel like I do believe in the principle, the right people will come, but yeah, 5 people is the minimum.
Got it. So we have 5 people as a minimum. Now that makes it, of course, a little bit more challenging, right? We're right now doing this podcast. It requires me as the host. I'm going to be there, and it requires 1 guest. It doesn't require 5 or 10 or 5,000. It requires 1. And that means for every single podcast episode to work, I need to have 1 person besides me. I could also say I do group coaching where I need to have 5 people and I use them to do stuff with each other and ping off each other and do some of the things you talked about, like feeling they're not alone and exchanging ideas, that sort of thing. But that would then mean I could hit more people. I could, instead of doing solo sessions, I could do 5 people on each session. On the other hand, it would mean that for every session, I would have a minimum of 5 people who needed to buy into the idea instead of just 1. That means calendars need to align. That means that people need to agree on what we're talking about. It means they need to be okay with the other people. All these sorts of things, that going from 1 to 5 is actually quite hard. So that's why I ask that, is there a way to change the format where it can work with just 1 person? Not saying you should, but just saying as a thing, what if you just had 1 person? What if I was there? I'm at one of your workshops. I'm the only one who shows up. And for better or worse, just saying goodbye and canceling is not an option. Could that be meaningful?
I'll be honest, I'm really struggling with this line of thinking.
Ah,
And I have a block here, and I want to be honest about the block.
I like that.
Yeah. So I'm struggling with what you're trying to get, where you're trying to get me to.
So I'm saying that we're in a moment, we're going to look at how to sell your workshops. But I'm also thinking that one of the things that I've had as a learning in formats and modalities and ways of doing some things, right? I get on a stage, I talk to 1,000 people.
Yep.
I get on the same stage, there's only 500 people, but it's the same talk. I do the same talk for 100 people. I do the same talk for 50. If it's 20, the mood starts to change. If it's 10, if it's 5, then it's really weird standing on that stage talking in front of 5 people. So I do that if I show up for a talk and there's only like I'm doing a talk at a conference or something like that, and if there's only 20 people, and that happens, then I get off the stage, I get everybody to sit in a circle, and I change the format. And that format works for 20 people. It doesn't work for 100. If there's 5 people, I can use the same format as with 20. I can just have people take up much more space. We can sit closer together. There's more time for the individual, blah, blah, blah. And some of the things I do when they're 20, which is put them out into like 2 or 3 person groups, I don't do because the 5-person group can handle all of us. If there's just 2 people, I just sit down and have a conversation with them, those 2 facing me. So it's like me doing like not couples therapy, but like you're now a duo and we're talking about something. If it's just one person, then it slips usually more into what are you trying to solve and how can I help? And that means that if I go into a room, whether there's 1,000 people or 100 people or 20 people or 5 people or 1 person, I have a format that provides meaningful results for those people. And I'm questioning, is there a Perle format with 1 person? And there may be, there may not be.
Yeah, it's a question I want to sit with, honestly.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Because I can see it turning into, because the other thing here is that I co-facilitate and co-design, right? So these workshops, it's not just a one-on-one, it's a 2-on-1.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that dynamic, like the questions I have are around the dynamic that creates for that one person, that one participant. What does that do for that participant? The potential, I don't know, like imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the questions that sparked my mind. And then the other thing that I have to be very conscious of is that person's time, the co-facilitator and the co-designer, to make sure that that person's time is really best used. And these are designed as 90-minute, 2-hour online workshops. These are also people who are super busy. And I have, you know, when I see that registration isn't going up and we're going to be really, really small, I'm like, is it fair to take people's time for this smaller audience? And that person may not even turn up, the person who bought their ticket, because that also happens.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the questions that I have around, you know, that modality of, you know, what size group is okay.
Have a think on it. And the reason I want to provoke a little bit here, or at least stir the pot a bit, is because sometimes by changing modalities, you can reach people in a completely different way. Mm-hmm. That there's a huge difference. If I do a lot of talks, right? And when I do a talk, then somebody will bring me in, whether they pay a lot or they pay a little or they pay nothing at all. Essentially, somebody will have an audience already, and they think that my message, word, style, etc., will be good for that audience. And I'm not worried about the audience because they've got that. I also have less control over the time. They tell me, is it 20 minutes? Is it 45? Is it what's going on? And I just have to fill that out in a meaningful way. And there's a huge difference between saying I do 2-hour workshops and I do half-an-hour keynote speaks. That you reach different people. And some people would not dream of going to a keynote because they don't want that. They want the interactive, they want the deep dive, they want the personal. They don't just want to be somebody in a crowd of 1,000 people unless it's Bill Clinton on stage. I've seen Bill Clinton on stage, right? That was, and Hillary as well. They were good. But there we were about 5,000 people in the audience. Of course, they're not cheap either. But there are other people who say, I'd never go to that. I don't care about that. What I want to have is I want to be part of the 5-person group. I want the intimacy of the group and the connections with the group. And I want to be able to ask questions and I want to be able to have it tailored for me. And both of these are valid, but they're not the same. And the question is that if one of your challenges is getting it sold and getting people to show up, but once they're there, they see the magic. Right? Let's see that we have 2 models next to each other. One is that you do 1 workshop every week and it costs £29, $29, 29 whatevers, right? 29 euros. And it's virtual and it's 2 hours. And with there's not minimum 5 people in the group, you cancel. You postpone. That's model one. Model two is you have 3 sessions a week and they're shorter sessions. The price is the same and they can be work with one person, they can work with 2 people, they can work up to a maximum of 5. So you're changing the session, but you have 3 of them a week that people can sign up for instead of just 1 a week. Now, the time commitment for them is smaller. Maybe it's an hour instead of 2 hours. But the format is also different. And you are fine with doing 1 with 2 people, 1 with 1 person, 1 with 3 people, total of 6 for a week, instead of 1 with 5. Because for you, it's about getting them in the door, since once they're in the door, they become your ambassadors and they feel the impact you give them and they become fans. But they need to see the magic before they see the magic. Just as an example, I'm not saying that's where we should go. I'm just saying, do you see the difference in the two?
Yeah, I do. And I guess so the workshops that I do, I want to move into the place where I'm doing like one in a workshop, one more activation workshop, more working together on big topics a month.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those might be repeats. And so for instance, we do one called the Stress Playground, Boundaries Bootcamp. We also do one on community organizing around climate in organizations. And so those workshops can show up a couple of times a year, right? And then I'm trying to also grow new workshops in there. And I guess I have had to reframe my expectations over the last couple of months on what group size is a good group size. Because for the inner workshops, when we do have a small circle and that intimacy that is there, it's incredible. It's so beautiful. But for the bigger action workshops, I would struggle to say I feel the magic happens because people look around and go, wow, we're doing this together, as opposed to, wow, I'm being coached.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very different.
on this topic, and I did a few workshops for a organization called Work on Climate last year, and you 270 people doing the same workshop that I would do for 20 people. There's so much incredible power on the collective wisdom and the movement element on that, and I feel that's where I come to life. So I find it hard to want to like scale that ambition.
And I think there we have a key, that it's tempting to think in terms of scale when what you do is a lot more impact driven. And part of it's also position, right? Imagine you're now the leader of some company and you would like to have some of the stuff Perle does. Your twin, your corporate twin. And the corporate twin has to choose between 3 people to lead the upcoming workshop. One says, I do small, intimate workshops for small groups of people where we really go deep. The other says, I do workshops for huge crowds of people. And the last one says, I do workshops. Now, 2 of those have more positioning than the last one. Because the last one is saying, I do small workshops, I do big workshops, I do medium workshops, anything as long as it's a workshop, that's me. But if you're saying, I do small, intimate workshops for executives who burned out and who want to get back on their feet, that's very different than saying, I do workshops, and one of the workshops is called Back on Your Feet. That part of it's also how people think of you. And the reason I say this is that you have obviously magic that once people have experienced it, you stick with them. They become ambassadors, right? They now know who you are. They've seen a little bit of that magic in action. They've felt it. They write you emails saying, wow, this still sits with me. So your problem isn't what you're doing. Your problem is getting them in the room. And getting them in the room is usually a matter of making it easy for them and of positioning. So if you're saying, I do workshops for huge groups of people, then there will be people who say, oh, wow, we've got 400 people. She sounds like our person. But if you're somebody who has a small company with 20 people, you'll say, yeah, she's obviously not for us. And if you say neither, then you might be for both of them, but you might also lose out to the one who's a bit more specialized. And here we're not talking about, do they know you already? Do they trust you? Do they like you? We're just talking about positioning. And by trying to do it all, you get more you can do, but there's fewer things that people think you should do or think that you do well, simply because of positioning, right? You met me at IMEX in Frankfurt, huge trade show event, 14,000 people. What was I wearing?
Batman.
I was wearing a Batman suit, of course, because that's what I do at conferences and trade shows.
What was I wearing, Klaus?
What were you wearing? You were wearing your smile, elegantly dressed. And the thing is, that means that nobody came up to you and said, I'm never hiring you because of the dress you're wearing. But you probably had very few people come up to you and say, wow, I need to talk to you because of the dress you're wearing. And if you did, they were probably not going to talk about business. Where the Batman suit makes people come up and say, I want to talk to you about business. But it also makes some people think, I will never work with that guy. What is wrong with him?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because last year when I first went freelance, I was like, I'm a facilitator, and that was about all I told did I get any interest in what I did? Not at all. And so in September, I was like, no, I connect large groups of people together. And that's what I do. And that's what I love to do, right? And that's super clear. And with that, it's interesting because with that clarity, I get asked for a lot of things. I've just been booked for a 2-day workshop, which is for 8 people in Amsterdam, purely because I'm super clear about what I do. It's nothing to do with my large group connecting people. It's just that I'm clear on who I am and my values. And I feel like that's a lot of the reasons why people show up to the workshops I do or need workshops on that concept, because they like me, and they're curious. There's a lot of curiosity or feeling when they're coming to the workshops. And I guess for me, the tricky thing is, how to scale that curiosity and get to more people to be curious about the workshops where I'm selling kind of B2C as opposed to B2B, because that's actually working quite well. Agencies are coming to me, companies are coming to me. But for me, that concept that I love and I'm so passionate about, and I really believe we need more of it in the world, is kind of collective wisdom, collective impact. That is where I'm struggling. Like, that's where the blocker is.
Mm-hmm. So, well, there are many ways of approaching this, but one of them is, again, I'm pretty focused on this, getting them into your room. And how do we get them into your room? Right? How is it? Because you could say it's free. That would appeal to some people, but others would like it less. You could say that it's free to come, but afterwards they pay some money so the next group can go. That's also a way to do it. There's a semi-famous New York party organization where you're not allowed to buy a ticket. You can only be given a ticket. And that means that somebody else buys the ticket for you. And you, when you go, you buy a ticket for the next person that you then nominate. And that only works because they do some pretty crazy experiences, else it would quickly fall apart. But that's also a model. There's also a way of saying, let's say you say you do these short things so they can get a feel for who you are. Right? Discovery calls are a classic. And I recently talked with a woman who said she got a lot of interest, but she was drowning in discovery calls because they took, I can't remember if they took half hour or an hour or what it was. And I said, what if you just took your discovery calls and made them half as long? And she said, oh, well, I guess I could do that. Yeah, that's a good idea, because it would still, the half length would still be more than enough for her to get a feeling for, does she want to work with this person? And they could get a feeling for her. but it meant that she was just doing less free work, as an example. And part of yours is that because you're essentially, if we're rough about it, right, you're going to the bar and you know you're good in bed. But going to random people and saying, hey, I'm Perle, I'm good in bed, is maybe not going, that's not the way to do it. And once they know, right, once they've hooked up with you, they know that's magical. And then they can tell somebody else, and then the metaphor starts getting weird. And of course, the reason I use bars as an example is that imagine you're at this bar and you know that you're great. And anybody there, whoever they may be, will be lucky. And you're actually interested in having a little bit of an adventure. Now, you can either go around and smile at people and get a drink and have a conversation and try to find out who's married, who's there with friends, who's up for an adventure, or you could write a sign, put it on your chest or on your back that says, I'm looking for a single man in his late 20s with low self-esteem who's looking for an adventure. I'm looking for a divorced housewife. It doesn't matter what you're looking for. The point is that if you put on, let's take the housewife sign. Let's say you put on a sign that says, I'm looking for a divorced housewife who's looking for a bit of an adventure. Now, most people are not even going to come close to you because they think that's not me. But when somebody comes up with 2 beers and says, hi, I'm Susan, one of these is for you, you know that's a good conversation. And while it's crass and while it's a little bit fun, it's how sales work, right? That if they don't know you're for them, then it doesn't help that you're good, because the only way to find out is by actually doing something with you. And it's very, very hard to get people to spend their money and their trust and their time if all they know is that you think you're good. And it might be true, right? You might be amazing, and you probably are amazing. Your workshops have great feedback, so that means you're very strong with recommendations. But how do you then get more people to recommend you? How do you get more people to say, this is Perle, she's magical? And if you say it yourself, it has a bit less value because the self-interest is quite clear.
I have a question around that because I have stepped over my fear of asking for, little recommendation or feedback after every workshop I do. The thing I struggle with is and people say lovely things and then I put them on the website. I just don't know how, especially with online workshops, to take pieces of that magic and create it as a teaser for the next, to give the sense of the energy that's in the room and to put energy behind a recommendation. That's where I struggle, and I would love some creative ideas on how to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think part of it is that we are a little bit, many of us, in love with the ideas of recommendations on LinkedIn and videos with somebody saying, oh, this was so great. We find that comforting and nice. The minus is that usually that's not where things come from. It's rare that people see, oh, I was just browsing the internet and I found your website completely by accident. And there was a video of a person I don't know who said, this was great. That doesn't do a lot, but it is comforting because it feels like it does something. What really does something is all those people you've had at your workshops. When somebody out there, right? Let's take Susan from the bar. She's been at one of your workshops. She felt it was amazing. And 6 months later, she's in a conversation with a random friend. She's talking to Ahmed, and Ahmed is saying, well, I'm thinking of doing something. I could use some help. And she says, you should talk to Perle. It's like, who's Perle? Perle is this amazing woman. I was at her workshop. It was really, I still think about it. Wow, you should talk to her. That is a strong recommendation. Susan writing on LinkedIn, it was great. Sure, that's fine, right? It's not bad. And if you have 1,000 of them, it's pretty powerful. But it's nothing compared to Susan remembering when she's randomly talking with Ahmed, hey, you should meet this person. Again, that's why I have the Batman suit. It makes me easier to remember. It makes it easier to stand out. It makes it easier when somebody says, you know what, we should get a speaker to talk about innovation. And it's very easy to say, I met this guy at this conference. He was wearing a Batman suit. He's a specialist in innovation culture. And then either they go, yeah, without knowing anything more, or they go, no, why would you suggest that? And both are good responses.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is the idea that it's like what am I leaving participants with to be able to take that forward and make that memorable, right?
Memorable, but also understandable.
Yes.
Many things are memorable, but understandable, because if I say, Perle, what do you do?
Workshop facilitator and moderator, experience designer. I bring people together.
Workshop facilitator, moderator, experience designer. Now, to most people, a lot of those words are like vague, where if you say, you run 2-hour workshops that connect groups and make them understand that they're not alone. And that's what you do, right? You do, that's what you do. That means that anybody who meets you will say, this is Perle. She runs 2-hour workshops that connects people and teaches them that they're not alone. Where the broader a category is, this is Enrico. He makes food. Oh, wow, I need food. It's a little bit different saying, this is Enrico. He's an amazing pasta chef and he does catering at big parties. Okay, now I know that for most of my life, I will not need Enrico, but when I'm planning a wedding or a big offsite or my daughter's graduation in 12 years or whatever it is, then I need Enrico. But I will never need Enrico who does food because I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it means.
Can I shift the conversation a little bit to a slightly different angle question?
Yes, yes, please do.
Because one of my approaches and one of my strategies for getting a network, getting to other people's networks, is attracting, I call them C-listers.
Yeah.
You have A-lister kind of impact makers. You have the Brené Browns, you have, Esther Perels, these people. And then you have the Bs who are trying to talk to the As, right? And the Cs are people who have a lot of following and a lot of people, they maybe publish some books, some new methodologies. They have a following because people believe in the impact they are trying to make. And for me, like one of my approaches is to try and get to those people because they already have an audience and I'm giving a different modality to getting their message across. And, what I find is a lot of those people are stuck in PowerPoint presentations, doing 20-minute speeches. But I'm saying, hey, there's a different model that we can work with your audience to get collective action, to get collective wisdom, and for your ideas as the person to grow. How do I but those people are getting a lot of noise and a lot of requests. How do I be the Batwoman to them?
You do it by being, ironically, I'm going to shift the conversation back because the answer isn't back. Some years ago, somebody posted a thing. It was a LinkedIn post and it was an advertising for a product. And I said, wow, this is exactly for me. In this case, it was how to do these promo shots for self-published authors. So you essentially uploaded your cover and then there would be like picture of it under a Christmas tree or the book at a beach or somebody holding it up, reading in a library. Like you got these mock-up shots and you had a tremendous amount of them in various positions and various sizes. And for the self-published author, this was a golden resource because it meant that you got, and I got, a lot of this promo material for free. So I got nice high quality photos featuring my book cover that I could use for book web pages or book promo, etc. And the moment I saw that, I went directly to their page, I bought it, and then I wrote a comment about it. And I had 2 friends who saw that comment who did the exact same thing, right? Because it hit us precisely. This was book mock-up promo pictures for the self-published author. Here's the service. And that's what it was. No more, no less. Now, they also had all sorts of other things their package did. I didn't care about any of that, because what bought me was, here's a specific problem that I want solved. And most of us, including myself, right, we are so afraid of the specific because we want to capture the general. And that means that if we're to do that, it needs to be very clear what we're doing, because then somebody can need that general. I find myself constantly recommending some people. I know a ton of people, and a lot of stuff crosses my desk, so I'm constantly recommending people. One of the people I recommend the most is an old friend, Lisa, who's a graphic designer. Now, Lisa also does a lot of other stuff. She's got a master's degree in event design. She already has a daytime job, but Lisa is a graphic designer, and she's good, and she's reasonably priced, and she's a pleasure to work with. So every time I see something like that pops up, somebody saying, hey, we're looking for somebody, I always say, hey, Lisa, I don't know if she's available, but give her a ping, and here she is. And she's gotten work from that, because to me, it's clear where I can recommend her, where I have plenty of people where I know they're great, I just don't know what they do. And that is making that, the simpler it is, either have a sphere that's general enough or something that is very, very, very specific, because then people say, oh, that's exactly what I need. Because most of us are complex human beings, but in the eyes of others, we're two-dimensional. At IMEX, I met a woman from China who'd been at a talk I'd given, and she introduced me to her friend, young German guy who spoke Chinese, who was there at the stand, and said, this guy is the best speaker in the world. I was, of course, very, very, very pleased to hear her say that, but she didn't say, this guy runs events in Poland, this guy is a consultant, this guy is this, and that's this guy's coach. No, because in her world, I was a speaker. I was a good speaker. That was very nice of her, but I was a speaker. And if I said, oh, by the way, I also do this and this and this and this and this and this and this, then she would not tell the next person that, because she would have gotten lost in complexity.
Clear. Yeah, I'm letting that land in my head. Just saying that out loud, because I'm nodding and going, Yeah, so like simplifying what it is for each part of the audience, like the audience and the co-facilitator, and just getting to the need.
Thing to where they understand what it is. The nice thing about speaking gigs is that the audience understands them. They see what they understand what they've seen. The people who are buying understand what it is. The people who are selling understand what it is.
Yeah.
Where a lot of what we do, facilitation, I mean, what even is that, right? What is the difference between a moderator, a facilitator, a curator, a workshop leader? Sometimes it's the same person, just with a different hat. And sometimes it's very, very different things.
Yeah, it's interesting, because you're so right. Often when I explain myself as that's what I do, I get lost in trying to explain what that is as opposed to what I do. So the conversation is in the wrong area, because I leave going, okay, they've lost interest now, one, and two, I actually haven't been able to grab them on what I'm really passionate about. Okay, so yeah, that's super clear. Do I have some more time?
We could do a little bit more time, and then I'll end this with Cameron Manwaring, friend of mine, who is one of the people I've met who has the strongest sales pitch in the simplest words, even though it's incredibly broad. And I've seen Cameron in action. He's very, very good. And what he says to people, he says, I understand what makes people share. And I've worked on media campaigns that have gotten many, many billions of views on social media. Everybody who hears those words goes, oh, I don't know why people share, but I want people to share what I'm doing. I need you. Right? He says, I understand what makes people share. And it's incredibly broad, but it's also very, very specific. And that means that who doesn't work with Cameron?
Yeah. Wow, I think that's one of the best ones I've heard, honestly.
It's the best one I know, and I've heard a few, right? And it's the best one I've heard. And it's not that it's not broad, because it is, but it's incredibly specific.
Yes. And it's every single word is so simple.
Yes.
There's nothing you have to go, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Wow. And then one kind of last slight divergence again, is this, I'm trying to do this by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I collaborate with other facilitators or impact makers. So I bring people in as I want to develop workshops. But the back effort is all me. And I wonder if you have any interesting models that might inspire me on how I can do the back office collaboration
Mm-hmm.
with, so that will help take a little pressure off.
So ironically, I talked about this with John Brooks in an earlier episode. I think it's episode number 18, if I remember correctly. And what we talked about was, in this case, something like graphic design. And I'll say the same thing that I said there, that if you are a pizza restaurant owner, then either you do your own menus and accept that they suck until you put energy into them enough so that they stop sucking, because now you're also a good designer, or you pay somebody so that they don't suck, and that costs you money because that person knows what they're doing, or you end up in the middle where you put in just enough effort and money for it to be bad, but not enough for you to be happy. And that's the worst place to be. That it's fine saying you do handheld menus and they're word art from the 90s because that's when you learned how to do it, and they are not pretty, and that costs you sales because while you're selling pizza, the menu matters. Or you say you get an actual graphic designer so the pizzas that are brilliant are accompanied by brilliant menus as well. Just don't get caught in the middle where you're trying to skimp on it, but you're not putting in the effort, but you're still getting the pain.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say it's okay to pay somebody. It's okay to say, hey, I want somebody to do this for me because I'm bad at it. I've got a guy who handles my invoicing and onboarding in various systems. If I want to get paid by Google, right? When we did something for them, their invoicing system is huge. They've got a huge system for all the stuff they do because they're Google. And getting onboarded, that is painful. Luckily, I've got Phil, who's pretty brilliant at that sort of stuff. And Phil gets some money to do it. And Phil does it very well. But if you don't have Phil, which you can hire him. Phil's good. But if you don't have Phil or somebody like Phil, then you need to do it yourself. And that means going through that learning, which is hard. But most of us think we like a Phil, but we don't want to pay that Phil. So, and we don't want to do it ourselves. So instead, we end up with a very cheap Phil that's not very good. Or we end up with some sort of automated solution that's cheap and just is terrible because it doesn't do what we need it to do. Or we end up with sometimes these weird principles, right? One of them I was advising a toy store, and they had an accountant who their founder didn't understand money at all, but he was pretty good at ideas and creating magic and play. So his accountant basically told him how things were run. And she had a rule that says, if you do not send us as a supplier, if you do not send us an invoice in PDF, it will not be paid. End of story. And I remember thinking, how do you do that when you're dealing with Lego or one of the big players where they say, here's our system, get used to it. Irresistible force, immovable object. And a lot of people who aren't willing to put in the time or the energy or payment, they end up in that sort of weird situation where to solve a problem, they've come up with some sort of weird bastard solution that works for them, but in reality just makes their life worse.
Yeah, it's tricky though, isn't it? Because when, I'm coming into my second year of freelancing, I have a single income household with a child, and it's hard to step, I started investing in lead workshops this year and getting people, a website. I was like, I could probably do a website that I could put some hours in, but I wanted to really step that level up. And it's interesting, all those decisions you have to try and make as a solopreneur on like when is the right time to invest and when not, and when to step over that fear of potentially making a financial decision that is difficult, or that so that's where I get stuck, I think.
And I think for a lot of that, the trick is to either go extreme one way or the other. Either find a fill or accept that it's not that good, or just remove it, right? A lot of people struggle with their websites, but what if your website was called pearlsofwisdom.com, like your name, of course, and then it says, hi, I'm Perle. I'm better at facilitation than at home pages. Here's my here's my email, here's my number, here are some recommendations from clients. And that's it. Nothing more. Now, would you like to have a professional website with all the good stuff and things? Of course you do. Would you like to learn how to do that? No, you really don't, because you're busy enough in life. Would you like to have crap? No. This is a way of not having crap because you simply don't have. Just a thought. Just a thought. Now, Perle, our time is coming to an end. I'm running out of pearls of wisdom, if there were any to begin with, even if you are not. And that means there's two things left on the agenda. Actually, three. The first one is to thank you, as I always do, because you brought your troubles not just to me, but to the world. That takes courage. Thank you for that. Thank you for being brave and for inspiring other people, hopefully. The second is thank you to all our listeners out there. You've listened, which is really nice of you. And if we give you one more thing to listen to, and ask you one last thing, Perle, that is to think of three things that you take away from our conversation today. Three pieces of inspiration, things you're going to do differently, things you just disagree with completely. That's also okay. Things that provoked you or inspired you, but three takeaways from our talk here today.
Yeah. I have a question in my mind about modality, on the how and to what size. And I guess the question remains in my head. I don't have an answer to it yet. But it's made me curious to look at it. The second is on, I understand what makes people share. I mean, that is a bit of a mic drop for me. And getting that really broad but specific positioning for need workshops and myself, love it. And I'm so excited to go dive into that. And the last one is around getting myself the right fills in my life. and seeing, where to balance that do self versus pay a human.
Pay a human. I like that. And for anyone out there who's actually curious about Phil now, his website is called theguyoucalled.today. And he's a fixer of trouble, right? So he's also incredibly broad, but he's quite good at it. So in case anybody's curious about the actual Phil.
The actual Phil.
The actual Phil. Thank you for sharing those three. Well, thank you for the time. This has been the Innovation Coaching Podcast. You've heard Perle.
You want to try and butcher it? You can just go with Pearl or Pearl. It's fine.
Just Perle. Just Perle.
Just
with the beautiful last name that has way too many vowels in it. And you've also heard me, your host, Klaus Rostel, which is a Danish name that nobody can pronounce anyway. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.